World War II. At 11:23 a.m. on September 19, 1944, inside an M4 Sherman near Arracourt, France, Private First Class Walter Kowalsski was crouched in the loader's position while 3 German Panzer IVs closed from 800 yards, his hands shaking because the man who'd held this spot 2 days earlier had been killed when a shell punched straight through the turret. And Walter wasn't even a trained loader. He was a replacement mechanic who had handled exactly 4 practice rounds in his entire life. While the gunner screamed about traverse speed, the commander shouted coordinates, the driver backed into a hedgerow, and Walter was expected to ram a 38-pound 75mm shell into the breach in 4 seconds flat. The textbook Fort Knox method drilled into everyone. Face the breach, nose forward, brass base aligned, slam it home, step clear. But in the cramped Sherman turret, Walter was left-handed, and when he tried to turn properly, his elbow smashed into the gunner. The gunner shoved him. The shell nearly slipped. The commander was screaming louder. The Panzers were at 600 yards, and Walter did something no manual allowed. He turned his back to the breach, reached behind himself, found the opening with his left hand, guided the shell in backward, and shoved hard as the breach snapped shut and the gun fired instantly, the recoil blasting heat and smoke across his neck while he was already grabbing the next round. Same motion, back turned, left hand guiding, right hand ramming. 3 seconds, breach closed, fire. 3rd shell in 2.5 seconds, 4th in 2 seconds flat, until the commander cut through the chaos. 4 hits, 4 kills, 6 minutes of combat, German tanks burning 400 yards away, the turrets suddenly silent as the gunner stared, and the commander climbed down like Walter had grown a second head, because nobody loaded a 75mm cannon backward. It violated every safety rule written since 1942, but it worked, and in that moment, Walter realized something Fort Knox never considered, something that would quietly change how Third Army Sherman crews fought. Because the M4 Sherman was never designed to duel German tanks head-on. It was built to support infantry, be reliable, cheap, and easy to repair, with nearly 49,000 produced. But its 75mm gun could barely penetrate 3 inches of armor at 500 yards, enough for a Panzer III, often not enough for a Panzer IV from the front, and useless against Panthers and Tigers. So American doctrine said 5 Shermans could overwhelm 1 Panzer by speed and flanking fire, a math that worked on paper, but in France meant 4 out of 5 crews died trying to get that shot, earning the nickname the death ratio, with losses of 4 or 5 Shermans for every German tank destroyed. Single Tigers wiping out dozens at places like Villers-Bocage, hundreds lost in a day at Goodwood, crews passing burned-out hulls on the roads, pulling wounded men from turrets, watching Shermans brew up when ammunition cooked off, knowing a frontal hit killed the loader first because he stood beside 20 ready rounds. So commanders tried sandbags, welded track links, fake markings. None of it fixed the real problem, because in a duel, the tank that fired first usually won, which made rate of fire everything, and the standard Sherman loading cycle of 4 to 5 seconds could be matched by German Panzer IV crews, while Panthers didn't even need speed because they could kill from twice the range. Yet American tank schools drilled only one safe method: face the breach, ram forward, learn it right-handed even if you weren't, never accounting for the reality that thousands of loaders in tight moving turrets were left-handed, where a right-handed loader moved smoothly and safely, but a left-handed one collided with the gunner, lost seconds, and sometimes lost his life, until one terrified mechanic under fire ignored the rulebook, turned his back, and proved that speed, not manuals, decided who lived. World War II, a left-handed loader had the worst possible problem because to follow the official method, he had to lead with his weaker right hand, while his stronger left could only support. And every time he pivoted toward the breech, his left elbow swung wide and smashed into the gunner, the traverse wheel, or the radio mount, turning a clean 4-second drill into a clumsy 5 or 6 seconds that instructors called acceptable in training but meant death in combat. And the numbers proved it. At Arracourt in mid-September 1944, the 4th Armored Division lost 18 Shermans in 2 days, most hit before firing a third round, with after-action reports noting loaders killed while fighting the breach, including one tank where a left-handed loader dropped a shell, lost 8 seconds recovering it, and died when a Panzer round hit the turret, taking the gunner's legs with it. Yet the problem went beyond handedness, because even right-handed loaders struggled once the tank started moving, since Shermans had no gun stabilization, and the breech bounced as the hull crossed rough ground, forcing loaders to steady themselves with one hand and load with the other, turning a 38-pound shell into a one-handed gamble where drops cost 10 to 15 seconds, and commanders watched helplessly as men died waiting for the next shot, until desperation forced a mistake that became a solution. 2 days before his famous fight, Walter Kowalsski dislocated his right shoulder when a deflected Panzer round slammed him into the turret wall, and though the medic declared him finished, shortages kept him in the tank. So when German Panzer IVs appeared through the fog on September 18, Walter tried to load the standard way, felt his shoulder fail, watched the shell slip, and in pure panic turned his back to the breech, reached behind himself with his left hand, found the opening by feel, and rammed the shell home backward, the gun firing instantly as heat scorched his back, then again and again, loading in 3 seconds or less until the enemy pulled back, leaving Walter burned, shaking, and silent, while the crew stared, because what looked insane worked for reasons no manual had ever considered: leverage, space, and natural motion. Facing forward meant pushing 38 pounds with arms fully extended, the weakest leverage possible, but turning backward let Walter drive the shell with bent arms, shoulder, and body weight like a short punch. Facing forward filled the turret with elbows and collisions, but turning parallel to the gun shrank his profile and gave everyone room, and most important, the backward motion followed instinct instead of fighting it, eliminating the hesitation that caused drops and delays, revealing that the Army's safe method wasn't just slow, it was killing crews. WW2, Walter's backward method erased the problem completely because he reached behind himself with his dominant hand and let instinct take over, meaning that under fire, when thinking breaks down and fear takes over, his muscles knew exactly where the breach was without looking, could feel the opening, guide the shell home, and do it faster and more reliably than any textbook technique. And the genius part was that it worked for both left-handed and right-handed loaders alike, but it also broke every single safety rule in the Sherman Field Manual, which meant Walter couldn't officially teach it without risking a court-martial, since Technical Manual 9731A demanded loaders face the breech, maintain visual contact, use both hands, and step clear of recoil, and turning your back violated all 4 at once, for reasons the Army considered deadly serious after documented catastrophic failures in North Africa. Yet Sergeant Raymond Miller faced a brutal choice after seeing it work: follow regulations and lose men, or ignore the book and win fights. So he kept quiet, and when Walter's crew destroyed 4 Panzers in 6 minutes on September 19, other commanders noticed, because when you're losing 2 tanks for every one you kill, you pay attention to anyone beating the odds, and within days loaders were copying the method without permission, whispering instructions behind maintenance sheds, firing more rounds per fight, surviving more often, and flipping the division's kill ratio nearly to even, until Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams caught it during a training exercise, stopped everything, listened to Miller's explanation, asked one question: does it work better than the manual, and after a long silence, ordered every loader in his battalion to learn it immediately, caring more about survival than doctrine. And within weeks, his battalion was fighting faster, losing fewer tanks, and killing more Panzers, which drew attention up the chain until General George Patton himself watched Walter demonstrate, timed it with a stopwatch, and issued a blunt order: adopt it army-wide or be relieved. And within 2 weeks, thousands of Sherman loaders across Third Army were turning their backs to the breach, raising survival rates by nearly 20% and sharply improving kill ratios, spreading through Europe and even the Pacific without ever being written into the manual, because the Army never officially changed the rulebook, and Walter Kowalsski never received a medal or commendation, only a quiet promotion, and 14 more battles survived, proving that in war, doctrine explains how things should work, but survival decides what actually does.
World War II. His tank was hit 3 times, and he walked away every time, his crew destroying 23 German tanks between September 1944 and May 1945, with Walter loading every single round using the backward method, so refined that by war's end he could ram a 75mm shell home in just 2.3 seconds blindfolded. The motion burned so deeply into muscle memory that thought was no longer required. And when the war ended, he quietly went back to Detroit, returned to work as a mechanic at the Ford River Rouge plant, married, raised 3 children, and spent 41 years at Ford without talking much about the war. Yet the technique he invented kept saving lives long after he came home, because it was taught before Korea, where Marine Sherman crews using it outloaded North Korean T-34s around the Pusan perimeter, carried forward into Vietnam, where heavier guns followed the same physics, passed down through M48s, M60s, and even early M1 Abrams training, never fully written into manuals, but quietly taught by veterans who knew it worked, until a historian finally traced it back to Walter in the 1990s and estimated it may have saved hundreds of lives, though Walter himself dismissed it as nothing special, just something he figured out with an injured shoulder. And when he died in 2004, his obituary mentioned World War II service, but not the fact that he changed how American tanks fought, a truth understood only by the former loaders who attended his funeral, men who had never met him but owed their lives to a technique passed hand to hand across generations. Because wars aren't won by manuals or perfect doctrine. They're won by ordinary people breaking the rules when the rules don't work, by scared mechanics finding better ways to load shells under fire. And if this story mattered to you, like the video, subscribe for more forgotten stories from World War II, and tell us where you're watching from, because every one of these stories matters, and every one deserves to be remembered.